I still remember the sound, a high-pitched, piercing scream, my own, echoing through the sterile white walls of the hospital. The cold metal table beneath me felt like ice, but the fire in my chest burned hotter than anything I'd ever known. My baby, my tiny, innocent child, was slipping away. But maybe I should start at the beginning. My name is Emily, and the moment my mom found out I was pregnant, she told me I had thrown my life in the trash. You're 19, Emily. 19. And pregnant by a man who sleeps on park benches? Her words weren't daggers. They were bulldozers, crushing every bit of hope I had left. I met him, Daniel, outside the train station on a freezing night. I was waiting for my ride home when I saw him sitting against the wall, shivering under a thin blanket. Everyone else walked past, pretending he didn't exist, but I couldn't. His eyes caught mine. They weren't the eyes of someone dangerous or broken. They were the eyes of someone who had been forgotten. I bought him coffee. One coffee became dinner. Dinner became conversations. And before I knew it, my heart was tangled in his. He told me he'd been a carpenter before life ripped everything away. I told him I was just a girl trying to escape a life that felt too small for me. We were two broken pieces that fit together in ways no one else could see. When I found out I was pregnant, my mom's disgust was instant. He'll never be a father. He'll never be anything. But I believed in him. I believed in us. What I didn't know was that belief would be tested in ways I couldn't imagine. Ways that would leave me gasping for air on a hospital floor, praying to a God I wasn't even sure I believed in. Because one night, the night my baby's heartbeat started fading, was the night I would finally understand the difference between love that's easy and love worth fighting for. And that fight? It began long before the hospital. The first time I told Daniel I was pregnant, his face went pale. For a moment, I thought he was going to run, like everyone else in my life said he would. But instead, he swallowed hard and said, "We'll figure it out." It wasn't the kind of confident promise you see in movies. His voice cracked, his hands trembled, but his eyes didn't look away from mine. That meant more to me than any perfect words could. The world, however, didn't see that moment. They didn't see him working odd jobs in back alleys, picking up bottles for recycling money, or spending hours repairing broken chairs in exchange for a sandwich. What they saw was a homeless man standing beside a pregnant girl who should have known better. The judgment wasn't silent. It was loud, sharp, and constant. People at the grocery store stared when we walked in together. My friends stopped answering my texts. My mom, who had already been distant, practically erased me from her life. "You're throwing away your future for someone who can't even take care of himself," she said over the phone one night. Her voice was dripping with disappointment, the kind that's meant to make you feel small enough to disappear. I wanted to scream back that she was wrong, but deep down, a seed of fear was already growing. What if she was right? There were nights Daniel didn't eat because he gave me his portion. There were days when the rain soaked through our clothes while we stood in line for the free clinic. And there were moments, quiet ones, where I caught him staring at my belly with a mix of awe and panic, like he wanted so badly to be enough, but wasn't sure he could be. Still, he never left. But the cracks were forming, not between us, but around us. Life pressing in on all sides. Money was running out. Shelter was never guaranteed. And my pregnancy? It wasn't smooth. By the 7th month, the doctors started using words like high risk and preterm labor. I brushed them off at first, telling myself I was strong enough to get through it. But in the back of my mind, I felt the clock ticking. And that ticking was about to turn into a siren. It was a Tuesday night, bitter cold, the kind that slices through every layer of clothing and settles deep in your bones. We were staying in a rundown shelter that week, one of the few that didn't separate couples. I thought we were lucky to get a spot. Daniel had managed to pick up some work fixing a neighbor's fence earlier that day, so we'd had a warm meal for dinner, something other than the usual soup-lined bread rolls. I should have felt safe, content even, but something inside me wouldn't settle. It started as a dull ache low in my belly. I brushed it off, thinking maybe I'd just strained a muscle walking too much. But then came the tightening, a pressure that wrapped around me and made my breath catch. I tried to hide it from Daniel, forcing a smile when he asked if I was okay. But Daniel wasn't stupid. He saw the way my hand instinctively rested on my stomach, the way my face paled under the flickering fluorescent light. "Emily," he said, his voice low but urgent. "What's wrong?" "I'm fine," I lied. "Just tired." We lay down on the thin mattress, the springs digging into my back. I tried to focus on the sound of his breathing, the way his arm draped protectively over me, but the pain kept coming in waves. It wasn't unbearable. Not yet, but it was steady. By midnight, the ache had turned sharper. My mind raced through everything the doctor had warned me about: preterm labor, premature delivery, tiny lungs that might not be ready to breathe. My chest tightened, but I told myself it would stop if I just slept. Then I felt it. A warm trickle, sudden and terrifying. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears. I shifted it slightly, and the warmth spread. This wasn't normal. "Daniel." My voice cracked, barely above a whisper. He sat up instantly, panic flashing across his face. Within seconds, he was on his feet, fumbling to grab my shoes, my coat, anything to get us moving. "We're going," he said, and for the first time, there was no hesitation in his voice, only raw fear. The shelter's hallway felt a mile long as he half carried me toward the exit. The freezing night air hit my face, and I realized something with bone-deep certainty. We might not make it in time. Daniel's arm was tight around me, half supporting, half dragging me down the icy sidewalk. The night was quiet, except for the crunch of our footsteps and my shallow, uneven breaths. Every step sent another jolt of pain up my spine. The city felt abandoned, all the warm homes and glowing windows mocking the two of us under the cold street lamps. I clutched my stomach, whispering to my baby under my breath like a prayer. "Hold on, please. Just hold on." We couldn't afford a taxi, and the buses had stopped running hours ago. The hospital was nearly 2 miles away. Daniel's pace quickened, his own breath coming in short bursts. "We'll make it," he said, over and over, as if saying it enough could make it true. But I could feel it. Something was wrong. The trickle hadn't stopped. My legs felt weak, my knees threatening to give way with each step. At one point, my vision blurred so badly the world seemed to tilt sideways. We reached the intersection near the hospital, when my body finally betrayed me. My knees buckled, and Daniel caught me just before I hit the ground. "Stay with me, Emily." His voice cracked, and I could see the desperation in his eyes. Somehow, adrenaline kicked in for him. He actually lifted me, into his arms, carrying me across the last stretch of pavement. The automatic doors of the slid open, and a rush of warm, sterile air hit my face. A nurse at the desk looked up and froze for a second at the sight of us. Daniel, with his unshaven face and worn jacket, carrying a limp, pregnant woman who looked half-conscious. But to her credit, she didn't ask questions. She shouted for a gurney. The next few moments blurred into chaos, hands lifting me, voices shouting medical terms I couldn't understand, the sharp smell of antiseptic burning my nose. Daniel's hand found mine for just a second before they wheeled me away. "Don't let go," I begged, but the doors closed between us, and for the first time that night, I felt truly alone. The fluorescent lights above me blurred into streaks as the gurney rattled down the hallway. My mind was spinning, my body tense, my hands gripping the thin hospital blanket like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. Somewhere behind me, I thought I heard Daniel shouting, but the nurses moved too fast for me to catch his voice. "Blood pressure dropping," someone said, another voice urgent but calm. "Get her into room 3 now." I wanted to speak, to tell them to let Daniel in, but my throat felt dry, like my voice had been stolen. My baby's heartbeat, oh God, the sound of it, was faint on the monitor, the rhythmic beeping slowing in a way that made my heart twist painfully. The doctor leaned over me, his expression sharp and focused. "Emily, we think you might be experiencing placental abruption. We need to act quickly." The words barely registered, but his tone told me enough. It was bad. My mind flashed to every warning the doctor had given me during prenatal visits. Every "what if" I'd pushed aside because I didn't want to live in fear. Now, that fear was the only thing filling my lungs. A nurse pressed a mask to my face, telling me to breathe deeply. The smell of plastic and oxygen filled my senses. I clung to one thought: my baby. My baby has to live. Somewhere in the chaos, I saw Daniel through the glass window of the room. He was pacing like a caged animal, his hands tangled in his hair, his eyes fixed on me, as if he could will his way inside. I wanted to tell him I was sorry for everything, for the judgment we'd faced, for the life we'd been forced into, for making him live through this moment. The pain surged suddenly, a deep, tearing ache that made me cry out. The nurse's hand pressed gently but firmly on my shoulder. "Stay with us, Emily. You're both still here. Still here." The words echoed in my head like a lifeline, but I didn't know for how long. The room felt both too loud and too quiet at the same time. Machines beeped in rapid bursts. Nurses murmured instructions. The doctor's voice cut through with commands. Yet all I could focus on was the faint, irregular rhythm of my baby's heartbeat. It wasn't steady. It wasn't strong. "Get me the fetal monitor readings now," the doctor barked. The screen flickered, showing a line that should have been smooth but dipped and wavered. My breathing grew ragged under the oxygen mask. I tried to force air into my lungs, but panic had its own grip on me. "I can't lose this baby, not like this. Not now." I thought of the nights Daniel and I had talked to my belly telling stories about the world we wanted to show our child. The flowers in spring, the ocean's roar in summer, the warm smell of cinnamon rolls in winter. Simple things. Things that felt a million miles away in this sterile, fluorescent world. A nurse squeezed my hand. Emily, we're doing everything we can. But you need to stay calm for the baby. How was I supposed to stay calm when my whole world, the tiny life inside me, was dangling between two heartbeats? Through the glass panel, Daniel was still there. His forehead rested against the door, eyes locked on mine. He mouthed something I couldn't hear, but I knew what it was. I'm here. The doctor turned back to me. We're prepping for an emergency C-section. The baby's not tolerating labor, and we can't risk waiting. A cold wave of terror swept through me. Surgery. Needles. The possibility of waking up to silence instead of a newborn cry. As they wheeled me toward the operating room, my gaze clung to Daniel's face until the door cut him from view. My chest ached, not just from fear, but from the thought that if something happened to me, Daniel would be alone again. Alone, but this time with a baby who might never know the sound of my voice. The lights in the OR were blinding. The smell of antiseptic burned my nose. Hands moved quickly around me, snapping gloves, adjusting straps. The anesthesiologist leaned over, speaking in a calm voice that felt far away. And then, in the silence before the first incision, I felt it, one strong kick. My baby was still fighting. The bright surgical lights bore down on me like a second sun. Cold metal pressed against my sides as they prepped my abdomen, the chill almost shocking me back to focus. A curtain went up just below my chest, blocking the view of what the doctors were about to do, but nothing could block out the truth. In a matter of minutes, I would either hear my baby cry, or I wouldn't. The anesthesiologist's voice was low, steady. You're going to feel some pressure, maybe tugging, but no pain. I nodded, though my throat felt too tight to speak. The first incision came with a strange pulling sensation. No pain, just the awareness that my body was being opened. My heart hammered against my ribs. I tried to count my breaths, tried to cling to the memory of Daniel's face at the glass window, but fear kept crashing over me in relentless waves. The surgeon spoke in clipped phrases to the team. I caught only fragments. Umbilical cord. Low oxygen. We need to move faster. Faster. God, please move faster. My mind went places I didn't want it to go. Images of an empty nursery, of tiny hands I'd never get to hold. And yet, beneath all the panic, a stubborn flame burned. This baby was mine. We'd fought so hard just to get here. I couldn't let the world take them from me now. Then came the moment, a strange, heavy pressure, a lifting sensation, and the absence. My belly felt instantly lighter, empty in a way that made me ache. But there was no sound, no cry. Is the baby okay? My voice broke into a desperate whisper, but no one answered right away. The seconds stretched into an eternity. I could hear the medical team moving quickly, murmuring to each other. And then, a thin, wavering wail filled the room. It wasn't loud at first, but it was enough to break something inside me. Tears blurred my vision as I heard the doctor say, "It's a boy." The nurse brought him around the curtain for just a second, his tiny face red and scrunched. his eyes squeezed shut. My heart swelled, so hard it hurt. Daniel wasn't there yet, but I knew when he walked in, I'd tell him the truth. Our baby had saved me, just as much as I'd saved him. They cleaned my son quickly, wrapping him in a thin white blanket, before placing him in a small bassinet near the bed. I wanted to reach out to hold him, but my arms were still heavy from the anesthesia. Then the door swung open. Daniel stepped inside, looking like a man who had just sprinted through hell. His hair was damp with sweat, his shirt rumpled, his eyes red, not from exhaustion alone, but from holding back tears. The nurse smiled at him gently. "Come meet your son." For a moment, he froze. It was as if the world had gone utterly still, and he didn't dare move, afraid this was all some cruel dream that would vanish if he blinked. Then, slowly, he stepped forward. When he reached the bassinet, I saw his hands tremble as he touched the edge. He looked down, and his breath hitched in a way I'd never heard before. "Hi," he whispered. One word, barely audible, but it was soaked in every emotion he'd carried through these months. Love, fear, disbelief. He reached out, brushing a fingertip over the baby's tiny fist. My son's hand curled instinctively around his finger, gripping it with a surprising strength. That simple connection undid him completely. I watched as Daniel bent forward, resting his forehead gently against our son's. "I promise," he murmured, his voice breaking. "You will never feel the cold the way I did. Not once. Not ever." The nurse looked at me, her own eyes glistening. "Do you want to hold him?" she asked. "Yes," I breathed, and Daniel turned, carefully lifting the baby into his arms before bringing him to me. The moment the tiny body rested against my chest, everything else fell away. The machines, the fear, the months of judgment. It was just us. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, leaning close. "You scared me tonight," he said, brushing my hair back from my face. "You scared me every day." I teased weakly, my voice thin from exhaustion. "But then," I added softly, "we made it." He nodded, his eyes still on our son. "We did, and I'm not going anywhere." For the first time in months, I believed him without doubt. I was still holding my son when the hospital room door opened again. For a split second, I thought it might be another nurse, but when I looked up, my chest tightened. It was my mother. She stood in the doorway like she wasn't sure she belonged there, her coat clutched tightly around her. Her eyes swept over me first, pale, exhausted, messy-haired, and then landed on the bundle in my arms. We hadn't spoken in months. The last words she'd said to me were laced with disappointment and finality. "You've ruined your life, Emily." I'd imagined this moment 1,000 times, and in most of those versions, I told her to leave, but now I just felt tired. She stepped inside, her heels clicking softly on the linoleum.